everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm here today to talk to you guys about a recent project I did about a family, and actually it's a self-published book. So first of all, I'm going to introduce you to my own family. This is me back in 1986, 7 years of age. This is a professional photo taken in my living room, and I promise I won't go through every year of my life. But 6 girls and no boys, and we grew up in the countryside. We all look pretty angelic there, but it was a fairly chaotic household to grow up in, with a little stint in Lagos, Nigeria for 3 years in between the Irish countryside. I left these guys 13 years ago to come over and do some assisting work in London. At that point, I knew I absolutely loved documentary photography and making portraits of people and places, already. And nothing really has changed, actually, except I've just kind of got a few years of experience in. So, yeah, I do a real mix of things. I do portraits, fashion and documentary stories for magazines. Also shoot a lot of kind of ad campaigns for stills. And more recently, I've been doing moving image and directing some TV ads as well. So I love kind of mixing it up. It keeps it really interesting. Yeah, I suppose, what I try to kind of keep in my work is a sort of a sense of storytelling and kind of this feeling of spontaneity, which I kind of see in, all documentary and street photography. And although kind of I go into everything with a bit of a kind of an aesthetic intention, I kind of like to leave everything else very flexible and kind of respond to the environment and to the people I'm photographing and kind of to that relationship that, and the rapport that you establish. And for me, I depend very heavily on that kind of relationship that I establish. Just flicking through a few of my portraits. The first book that I self-published was in 2011, and it's all about my favorite place in the world, Achill Island, which is on the west coast of Ireland. It was all about the teenagers and the kind of sense of isolation living in this very raw and unpredictable landscape. And I think I shot 40 teenagers altogether, and that was all of the teenagers on the island. So it's not that big. I then went back 2 years later, and I decided to do a book on the hydrangea plant, following the hydrangea around the island, which gave me a completely different perspective on the island. It was quite random, but it was an interesting journey all the same. And it just, I kind of focused entirely on the landscape with this one. This is to introduce my first family project, which was all about the Parkers who live next door to me here in London. That's Charlie Parker, and he used to come and throw stones on my door. And eventually I kind of went over and knocked on his door and asked his mum, could I take his photograph? And kind of 3 years later, after many visits, just dipping into their household, kind of unannounced, I kind of had this series of images of the gang. And really it was all about just kind of their relationships, watching them through the years and kind of how they were all changing, and I suppose how they were, the level of kind of, how they were responding to the camera and, they were performing. Sorry, these are my two. This all just happened in the last 3 years, and while I've been doing the project, and has probably given me the biggest insight into family. So this is the name of my new book, I Zii, which I can't really pronounce yet. So I'm sorry if there's any Sicilians here. Best to choose a title you can actually pronounce. But it means collectively, or is used collectively to refer to uncles, aunties, and cousins. And how it began was I was basically having a chat with a friend of mine, Aisling Farinella, one evening, who I thought was just Irish, but actually she's half Sicilian. And that night she was just banging on about her family, and she was, talking so passionately about, all her relatives there and this beautiful, very kind of, again, remote town called Ganji, where they all live, and this very special landscape that she kind of just was completely in love with. And then she started to talk about, how close they were and, the amazing respect that they have for the older generations and these beautiful traditions. And then she started talking about this kind of really chilled out, slow pace of life. And a couple of months later, I'd sort of invited myself out to photograph her family for 2 weeks. And we went over together at Easter 2013. And I simply kind of had an agenda. I just wanted to photograph the family, kind of investigate all the things that she'd sort of been talking to me about and the relationships between them, but also the relationship between them and the landscape. So yeah, just, kind of similar to the Ackle thing, except about family and place. And from the beginning, I kind of had an idea in my head that it could make a nice book, because I'd forgotten the pain of making the first book. Yeah. So this image here is the image I begin the book with, and it's the first photograph I took, which is when I was approaching Ganges, and I kind of thought, oh, God, this looks more slum than fairy tale, to be honest. And the light was crap. I was in a moving car, and I thought, oh, God, well, I'm going to take it anyway. So I took the photo, and to be honest, this was kind of quite important because it was the premise of how I wanted to approach the way I was shooting everything and just keeping everything really fluid and looking for, I suppose, these kind of imperfect moments and to stop kind of waiting until the conditions were perfect and to just start kind of looking for the charm in these things that I would have dismissed before. So getting stuck in, this is kind of one of the, I think this is the 89th birthday of Salvatore here. We tended to go to all her relatives' houses around mealtimes. Because they lasted about 4 hours and we tended to have about 6 or 7 courses of pasta and meat and desserts. But it was a time when everybody came together and everybody was really relaxed, so it was really, it was much easier to kind of get these more casual moments that I was after. I don't speak any Italian, as I've already kind of illustrated. And, I thought this was going to be negative, but in the end, it actually turned out to be quite a good thing because I started to focus on people's body language to try and understand what the hell they were saying. And obviously, Italians and Sicilians are quite well known for being very expressive. So it became, one of the themes in the book. But also, I'm so used to kind of waffling away to everybody while I'm taking their photographs. It was nice that I couldn't because I kind of have to stand back because they sort of would start to ignore me after a while, and it just meant I could kind of get those really relaxed moments without intervening, even with the animals. In between meals, I did a lot of driving around the landscape, trying to imagine what it would be like to live there, kind of looking back up at Ganges and looking back out, and looking at the town from every different angle. But I got quite distracted by the roads up there because they're quite shocking. Every 2 or 3 miles, you kind of came across a little mini landslide, and this road here just fell off entirely and picked up a couple of 100 meters, further on. And I think basically they were left without a road for about 2 years and had to take a dirt track around. So there was a real sense of kind of abandonment up the mountains and a feeling that the place was kind of being left to crumble. And that kind of, I suppose, that nature was taking over a little bit. Unlike this sense of abandonment, this is kind of a picture of Zia, Lisa's bedroom. I absolutely loved looking at the interiors of the older generation because they're just so beautifully maintained and incredibly orderly, minimal, so well cared for, and everything feels like it's really well cherished and almost on display. And there was it felt like nothing was disposable in their houses, and I could see a lot of similarities between the Irish households and the Italians. There's always like a saint on every wall, in every room, to kind of keep care of things. Whilst I was there at Easter, I suddenly realized that they all have second homes down the countryside because it gets really hot at the top of Ganges. They're all very modest houses, but they all whip down there for a couple of months in the summer. So I kind of needed to go back again to sort of check it out, how it was and how kind of they led their life and how things changed and how the landscape changed. So I kind of came back with this load of film that was just so orange and burnt looking, which, you know, I could see it when I was there, but after a couple of weeks I kind of got used to the colors and hadn't realized, you know, how different it all looked when I came back. So it meant when I kind of got around to the edit, you know, there was no way I was going to be mixing the two seasons. The edit itself took me about 2 years. I spent 4 weeks shooting it, 2 years editing it. So it was quite a painful edit, and I think one of the reasons it was very difficult was because I was photographing a friend's family. And it sort of brought to the fore that, you know, there's an extra layer of responsibility and you're sort of aware of the sensitivities. I think Aisling said it was like peeling back the layers of a chipolata sausage. So I think it's just quite revealing, and you know, when you're making the edit, you kind of need to obviously stay objective and kind of stay true to kind of how you would do it. But you know, it was very much about striking a balance with this one and kind of, you know, just being very careful with it. Moving on to the design of the book, I worked with design duo Connor and David of Workgroup, and they did a really beautiful job designing the book, really sensitive and elegant and kind of sympathetic to the work. We initially had loads of text throughout the book, kind of all these little insights and anecdotes that Aisling had written, really beautiful pieces of writing. But when I brought it all together, it suddenly kind of felt a little bit just too much. Like there was all the, kind of the sense of intrigue that was actually very important and is very important to the work was kind of disappearing. So quite a tough decision, but we ended up scrapping everything except for this one page in the middle of the book and a beautiful introduction that she wrote. This is sort of the kind of the way we ended up working with the images. I was really interested in using all sorts of different image sizes to kind of, I suppose, reflect the undulating landscape and the higgledy-piggledy nature of the town and the slightly sort of natural dysfunction of family. But you know, this is I suppose the reined back version, because if I'd been left to my own devices, it would have been a kind of dreadful mess to any designers out there. So yeah, so I finished up. The book is out there now. It was obviously a very enjoyable experience going out and kind of getting this insight, and a real kind of privilege to be involved and to get this sort of permission to go in and photograph somebody's family. But you know, one of the things I noticed when a project is about really small things and kind of about everyday life and where nothing really happens, it's very easy to lose sight of the importance of kind of documenting that kind of thing and this sort of outsider's perspective. I definitely had a few wobbles along the way, kind of wondering, God, how relative is this? But when I brought it all together, kind of put it out there, you know, it felt really worthwhile, and I'm sure I'll forget the pain of the edit again and do another book. And that's everything. Thanks very much. Thanks for listening.